that we don't have to go to war. We can manage conflict in non-violent ways, and the aim of our organization is to do that. We do it in several different ways. We have core programs which seek to help governments, communities on the ground in fragile and conflict-affected countries, and military entities, private sector, supporting them to find concrete ways to, for example, one of our programs is long-term to help a divestment of money away from the arms industry. Another of our programs is to help countries, fragile countries, to develop what gets called an architecture for peace, which is a solid mechanism to provide early warning and ways of mitigating and managing conflict, violent conflict. We work with governments that donate money to fragile environments to help them fund budgets specifically for prevention. And we're helping to get private-public partnerships around having responsible investment in conflict prevention. And then the other, what kind of underpins what we do and manifests in terms of events and public engagement work and training is where I think we have a great link with Creators of Peace, is our belief that we need to do our own inner work to be effective in our outer work. And so developing the skills to bring out develop our hearts and our empathy and our hard skills of, essential skills of listening and communicating effectively with those who are different from ourselves. And I can talk a little bit more about that later, but we call it developing the mighty heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. So we will be putting links to the website, the books, which Teohna just mentioned. So we'll be putting them up towards the end, and we will send an email around which will give you links to that. So we now invite Jackie. Thank you very much, Jackie. We'll just get Jackie unmuted.
Thanks, Elle. So as Elle already mentioned, you know, I've done a lot of different things in my life, particularly in my early career. You know, worked in retail, publishing with some of the people who are actually on this call. And how I got into kind of peace building was, as Elle said, by hearing the Dalai Lama speak. And he was talking at Initiatives of Change's International Conference Centre in Switzerland, where I was volunteering in the summer of 1996. And I heard him talk about his vision for the 21st century as a century of dialogue for peaceful coexistence. And I was really inspired by that. And I thought, okay, that's something I want to be involved in. And then I thought, well, if I'm going to be involved in that and potentially facilitate interfaith or religious dialogues, I want to do that from a place of understanding rather than ignorance. So I better go and learn something, which is how I ended up doing lots of academic studies in the study of religion, particularly South Asian traditions, and getting a PhD. And that process took a very long time. That was almost 15 years in the academic context, where I also ended up working as a teaching fellow. But after that, I thought, well, I really need some practical skills, which is how I ended up training as a mediator in order to have those skills to facilitate conflict transformation. And I trained first as a civil or commercial mediator, but I couldn't kind of get into that. And then I decided what I really wanted to do was gain skills, but also support something in the local community, which is how I ended up being a community mediator in the area where I live. And that's really about helping people solve disputes with their neighbours. And those things are, and I'm still doing that now, although it's much harder doing that kind of work in the virtual space because of the demographic of clients. So what I'm working on now is interesting, because I'm using all of those dialogue skills and not so much of the research that I did on gender within a South Asian context. And in my role in Initiatives of Change UK, I'm collaborating with individuals and organisations, a number of whom happen to be on this call today, which is fantastic, and trying to enhance collegiality within the organisation as well, which is why I'm delighted to be here with Creators of Peace UK, Creators of Peace International, and particularly the Business Plan for Peace, because that's what I'm interested in, is about how we all come together to do that shaping for peace and more, you know, remaking our world. And in my capacity as a trainer with Initiatives of Change, I'm co-designing and co-delivering a module for our programme called Refugees as Rebuilders. And that module is on dialogue for social cohesion. And we're about to start the course online at foundation level, something completely new, in October. So that's very exciting and very challenging as well, because we're taking it beyond the confines of the UK into the global space, which is very exciting. And as I said, I'm also working as a community mediator. I'm really trying to support people in resolving conflicts within the local context. And that kind of fits with, you know, IFC UK's vision and approach as well, in terms of how we use dialogue, how we have honest or courageous conversations to transform our world. So that's what I'm up to in the here and now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackie. So we've had a very short introduction from our speakers, and I'm just going to move us on into sort of thinking about sort of the shaping, when this idea of shaping peace together, and this idea of, you know, what and where are those fertile edges? Where can we see and start to make that magic happen? How do we recognize them, and how can we engage with people, or it might be places? Or so I'd like to open that up to perhaps Teohna to start us on that question, and then Jackie and Miranda afterwards. Please feel free to join that discussion. I'm going to invite the speakers to keep themselves on. Don't mute yourselves after Julie's taken you off. Well organised putting you back on screen.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, it's challenging. It's a challenging question, Elle. I think where are the fertile edges? How do we find the new shape that we need? So my reference point is a country that is in conflict. That's kind of what I know best. And I think you know, that context means that it's an obviously raw context where there is a complete lack of trust. There are competing agenda. People are literally trying to survive. Some people trying to survive for their life, some people trying to survive in their position, especially political positions. And so it's quite easy to feel like there isn't fertility, there isn't the possibility of shaping anything together, because everyone's just trying to grab whatever they can grab. And what I've found in those situations, the way in is always just to bring it back down to the human level. So, you know, and so I'm engaging a lot with people in positions of leadership from a political point of view, and usually from a military point of view. So security actors and politicians. And in the mix are people from the country. So if I take South Sudan as an example, and hundreds of people from outside the country who think they've got a solution, including me, right? So I recognize that I'm a visitor into that space. And so I think one of the first things that we have to do is step back and breathe, try and take a broad perspective. Some of the skills that people highlighted at the beginning of the first question you asked our guests around listening and observing. And I found that when I dare to do that, and it's really hard as well because everyone's under pressure. You're under pressure whoever you are, either because you're motivated by trying to keep more people alive and therefore ending the violence as quickly as possible, or because you've just got to deliver on something, or because there's a big fat negotiation coming up, or whatever the reason is, everyone's always under pressure. But daring to take that space, to listen, to observe, I find that then I can see someone's heart, I can see the person who's maybe got a new idea, I can see that there's a woman waiting outside the room that's full of men, whatever it is, but finding that, that human element and then just building on that. So very often it's about just sitting with one person for a while and listening, asking a few questions, trying to understand from their point of view. And then gradually, as that builds, finding the way to include that voice, that perspective, that consideration into the bigger discussion. And I've learned that even warlords, as they tend to be called, care about their kin. So everybody cares about somebody. We all care about ourselves and trying to stay alive, but we all have other people that we care about as well, even if it looks on the surface like we don't. And so it's finding a way to somehow try and penetrate the heart of that individual who seems to be blocking everything. And that's often not, you know, even if I spot that, I'm not always the right person to try and make that move. So it's also about finding the right way to collaborate, the right people in the right way in the right place. So let me stop there for a moment and let others contribute.
Just while you're on that question, just on that subject, Teohna, you just said that sometimes it's not you, you have to find somebody else, or you identify somebody else. How much of the cultural context is part of that decision making?
Huge, and should be, I would say, best for all of us if it's a very large consideration. Because if you're trying to do something because you think it looks sensible or helpful or right, whatever that right might be, without taking into consideration and I'm thinking very much in this context of having outsiders like myself being invited into a country that is fragile. So if I'm not taking my starting point and my checking point as the culture and the people that I'm there to serve, then I'm likely not to make much progress and possibly do harm. So, but that said, it's also, it's complex because, or it's sensitive rather than complex, because there's also times where the people who are living that conflict, whose country you're in, are so deeply immersed in the mess of conflict, and that they sometimes need that outside. That's the value sometimes of bringing in external people, but they sometimes need someone from the outside to say, you know what, let's do this, let's try this, or talk to this person. So I think that it isn't a hard and fast rule, if you like. It's around having that sensitivity to see. But for me, and you know, I'm an anthropologist, so of course I would say this. I think trying to use your starting point and your reference points as the culture of where you are is absolutely essential.
Thank you, Teohna. That's a lovely word, sensitivity. I think that's a lovely word to keep in the tool bag. I think the bag of tools. Jackie, would you like to add to this conversation?
Yeah, I would. I was picking up on what Teohna was saying as well about being invited into someone's context, and that's definitely what happens in community mediation. We're invited normally, in a not COVID world where we can't do it, into people's homes to hear what's going on for them. And that requires that sensitivity that Teohna is talking about as well. And to do the listening with empathy, because sometimes it's not just one person that we're meeting, we'll be meeting an entire family. And, you know, with a co-mediator, hearing everything that's going on for them with quite a high level of emotion. And for me, you know, what I know for myself in that context is what I have to practice is, you know, enormous self-awareness with my sort of empathic listening. And you know, we talk a lot in mediation and these sort of things about being neutral and the third party and all of that. But of course, I'm a human being. So when I show up in that context, it's very easy for me to be biased towards or against a particular party based on, you know, just hearing something for half an hour. And I know that for myself, that I've gone from one context to another, you know, party one to party two or whatever. And in that context, I've realized that I'm not listening with empathy. I'm not listening at all, really, because I'm just a sort of seething mass of bias. And that self-awareness, you know, that I'm trying to practice, the sort of mighty heart, that stuff that Teohna is talking about, if I'm aware and I'm noticing, oh, look, I'm really biased towards or against, or I'm not really listening, then in that moment, I'm really having to work on myself. I'm really having to practice and kind of dig down deep to change, to be open, to be able to listen really empathically. Because the point of it is for me to hear what's going on for somebody else, and not to solve their problems, but for them to figure out how they can, you know, move forward with something. So that, you know, the same things apply in the terms of the kind of human element, as Teohna was talking about, whether we're at the kind of, in our families, in ourselves, in our families, in our, you know, in our communities, and then it just escalates. So for me, you know, it's about stretching out of my comfort zone and practicing courageous conversations to develop my peace muscle to support other people in developing their kind of peace muscle, as various you know, phrases I heard last week, and they've really kind of stuck with me. So, you know, doing my inner work is actually about supporting other people. Not just a kind of, oh, you know, I've got to work on myself, but there's a really bigger purpose for that, is about how I show up to hold the space for other people.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you. I've made a note. I love the words you use there, courageousness, and stretching out of our comfort zone into that risky area where we feel slightly at risk. So Miranda, I'd love to invite you into this conversation. What's your thoughts around the work that you've done around those fertile edges which you've talked about before?
Yes, I always think when we're talking about edges, I always think about the edge of a woodland, and in my some of my practice in terms of gardening and growing in kind of the real sense of planting and plants, there's the concept that all of the edges are the most productive spaces. So the place where the woodland meets the field, there are more plants than anywhere else in that area, and it's where lots of creatures live and ideas live in the kind of metaphorical sense. So for me, those edges and those places where we intersect are the most interesting and exciting places. They can also be quite messy and look very they can look quite dense sometimes. So I think for me, it's about finding that place, like Teohna was saying, that kind of that way of just taking that step back and taking a breath and really thinking, okay, where do we sit? Where do we sit together? And taking the time to really find those deeper connections, find those spaces where you genuinely connect on that human level. And I think that's the case for wherever you are, in terms of whether it's a meeting in in a city or in a space of conflict. It's that taking that time really to meaningfully connect with each other, to be able to ground into a space where you can hear each other as humans, whether that's through conflict or to be able to support the easing of conflict. It's that sitting sitting with and listening to each other in a very genuine way, and yeah, finding those places where you intertwine and interconnect, either as projects or as people, and most usefully I think as people first, to be able to really truly connect, and I think that's the important space for me anyway.
I would love to quickly add, if I can, Elizabeth, just in listening to Jackie and Miranda, thank you both so much. You know, doing my own inner work, I've just had a realization of one of the things I need to keep developing is, you know, I don't like conflict, right? That's why I do the work I do, to help people get away from conflict. But actually, in listening to you and that idea of, you know, what's happening at the edges and that you were talking about, Miranda, I also know that sometimes I have to find the courage and the trust in a process that sometimes conflict actually, and that messiness sometimes needs to be given a bit of space, right? So you could have that a nasty kind of interaction between people, and rather than trying to end it, slow it down, you know, cut it, whatever, then I know that sometimes I can do better when I allow that to happen, because something else can grow out of that otherwise would have taken a lot longer or wouldn't have happened or whatever. So yeah, I just had that realization, so thank you.
Thank you. Oh, please go ahead, Miranda.
I was just going to say with that is that there's something, and I can't remember who the book is by, but it's called Staying with the Trouble, and it's about staying with what is, rather than rushing through it or jumping over it or stopping it. And that really, yeah, resonates with me very strongly. It's like, how do we stay in the mess, and work sort of like swimming through it almost together, and finding those ways through, even when it's really, really, really hard, because that is where the growth can often sort of really sort of expand us, and also allow for very exciting possibilities of change.
Yeah, and I'd pick up on what Miranda earlier as well said about breath and, you know, depth and time, because even in those moments where it's a bit of a mess and you're thinking, oh God, you know, what happens now and where to go and how to support, just to hold that moment of kind of inner pause, the you know, even the silence, to, you know, just see what occurs in the silence, to take that moment. I've learned that as well, that, you know, just to go, okay, and then sometimes amazing stuff happens, because it's, you know, it's not about me, it's about me holding the space for other people. And if I can get into that deeper kind of reflective self, and have that silence, even in the mess, I you know, I can see that amazing stuff happens out of that. And that for me is also a practice to develop in daily life, to have that kind of the reflective thing. And that's also about the sort of slowing down, going deeper in order to go faster later. Yeah, so just, you know, there's a lovely thread between what we're all saying, and I appreciate that.
Thank you. You've actually all gently moved us on to the next point that I was hoping we could talk about, which is togetherness. So there's two very strong challenges that sort of we're looking at. It's the shaping bit, which has got its challenges in itself, which you've all talked about. And then it's this idea of bringing those people together, which you've just started to touch upon. This idea of what that journey is like between sort of the journey to the space of being peaceful, and how messy it is. And it would be lovely to hear a little bit more from each of you, a little bit about that idea of togetherness, and what that means in your experience, in your activism, or in your work in South Sudan, or Jackie with your work with refugees in the UK. Miranda, would you like to start?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the most important thing about working together is that there's the possibility for cross-pollination, and it's also much nicer to work with people. But also the not duplicating. I think working as an activist, you often find you're sort of doing a thing, and then you discover that there are 5 other groups doing that thing, and you're all fighting for resources, and you're all trying to, you know, work a million hours a week, and then when you finally find each other, it's like, oh wow, okay, we've got 10 times the capacity than we did before, and we can actually take a breath, work out how we take on all these different pieces of work together and actually find a way through. So in Oxford there's a wonderful food movement, and there's been something quite incredible during these times where the sort of mutual aid organisation that has formed out of the COVID situation has meant that more and more of the people doing work around food poverty and food waste have come together, even though that was already an amazing movement here. Those people have really pulled together and gone, right, okay, we're in a crisis, and now they're supplying 2,000 families every month with food in this city. So it's like seeing how incredible things can be when people pull together, and the way that can actually create a little bit more space for different things to happen. It's very exciting.
Teohna. Oh, sorry, Miranda.
No.
Yeah, thank you, Miranda. I think I'll maybe do a call out or a focus on people who are in positions of leadership. When I think about togetherness and the value of working together, those of us that find ourselves in a position of leadership, obvious leadership, maybe it's in our title, or you know, whether it's political or you're heading up a company or a small organization, whatever. The longer we've been doing something and the more responsibility we have, in other words, the greater the leadership position, I think the harder it is to keep working together with others, to keep collaborating. And that's often because the stakes are high, certainly in the work that I do when we're talking about violent conflict, but even within families, within communities, within teams, the stakes are higher, you know, you're under more pressure and you know more. And when we get really expert at something, we tend to, the easiest thing to do is that we go like this. We become very narrow in our focus, in who we include, and we just try and move quickly, and it's much quicker and much easier if I just decide. We'll just do it my way. And yet we know when we look at leaders who we admire and who we're inspired by around the world, whoever they are, that one thing they all have in common is they absolutely work in collaboration, and they look for those to their side, for those behind them, those in front of them, and those coming up. You know, they look to them for solutions and ways forward. And so, you know, I think we've got fine examples of where it works and where it doesn't work in the people in positions of leadership in our politics in various different parts of the world, including this country at the moment. So we know what works and we know what doesn't work when it's, and the pandemic has helped reveal all, right? Nobody can hide from anything. People are naked in that way. So we see the benefit of when people collaborate and work together. And I think it's, I also just want to pick up on, Miranda, your point around, you know, when you're fired up to do something, whether it's because you're an activist or for whatever reason, it is very easy as well just to be blind to everybody else. And one thing that informs our decisions in Business Plan for Peace in terms of what do we focus on, because if anybody does know Scilla Elworthy's book, Business Plan for Peace, there's 25 different initiatives that are outlined in that book, all extremely needed, valuable, many of them already being done. And, you know, we could just do those 25 things, but actually a couple of things that inform us deciding what we do focus on, aside from where our expertise lies, etc., is to avoid duplication and to avoid competition. So many of our sister organizations, our partners, are working on some of the issues that we care deeply about. A lot of the work around women, for example, we found organizations like your own, Creators of Peace and Initiatives of Change, and many others. And so we're not obviously doing a program in that area because we would much rather support and enable our partners to do that better. And we'll try and fill a gap that doesn't have enough energy or involvement or funds or whatever in it. So that minimizing duplication and maximizing cooperation and collaboration serves all of us. It seems a very obvious thing to say once we start talking about it, but our habit is often goes against that. So I think it's a wise thing to highlight it. Thank you, Al.
Yeah, when I was, hearing while I was laughing just briefly while Teohna was speaking was in recognition because we're talking about, our styles also of leadership or communication. And suddenly, these 5 modes of conflict popped into my mind from Thomas Kilmann, where if we're very, it's not always appropriate to be very collaborative. I was saying to my mother, a few days ago, because I was talking about the training that I'm going to be doing for refugees as rebuilders. If your house is on fire and someone's saying, get out and use this door because that's the fastest way to get out, that's a kind of fixed way of doing something, because in that moment, in that context, collaboration is not the way to do it. You don't all stand around going, well, maybe we should go out of this door or this window. The point is just to get out because it's about survival. So I think sometimes, and I'm somebody who really advocates collaboration and collegiality because that's also part of my organizational role. But what I've actually had to learn is that sometimes that's not the best way to do stuff. And I'm really surprised that in this moment, in this context, I'm saying that. But I think we also have to think about what is the appropriate mode in the context, in the moment for what we're trying to achieve. And I do think also in working together, considering also what's going on in the world at the moment, not just COVID, but all the stuff around Black Lives Matter. We need to acknowledge wounds of history. We need to accept and embrace difference, as one of my colleagues was saying last week. And I think this is also about really treating each other with dignity and practicing that. And being aware, that self-awareness I talked about before as well. But I think these are values or virtues, and some of us might call them feminine values or virtues that we need to practice. But it is, as we say in community mediation, it's about changing our disputing behaviours. It is about what we say and do. It's not just a theory. But it's also, for me, recognising, that we have different leadership styles or communication styles, and knowing how to respond to somebody else who has a different communication style and might want us to say things in a different way or approach it in a different way. So it's also something about having flexibility and adaptability for me.
Thank you, Jackie. There's a couple more questions that I'd like to move us towards before we go out into breakout rooms and come back into a Q&A. And I've already noticed in the chat box that there's quite a lot of conversation around sort of men and women. So I'd like to take the conversation into the feminine intelligence and sort of gender, male, female, and what that means. So Teohna, I'd like to open that up to you first, actually, if that's okay. Because I know you're quite passionate about this, and could you share a little bit more about your ideas around feminine intelligence in peace building in general? Thanks.
Thank you. I think first of all the terms we use are, work for some and don't work for others. For a while, I've found feminine intelligence a very helpful term, and we've used it and do use it in Business Plan for Peace. And that's very different from feminine, it's very different from feminist. Feminine intelligence is a human intelligence. It's got nothing to do with whether you're a man, a woman, or whatever your gender or sexual identity is. It's open to everyone, we all have it. I think one of the reasons it's termed feminine intelligence is because it is, and why people associate it with women is because the feminine tends to be, generally speaking, much more stronger, dominant, or manifest in women than in men. But I know many men who have very highly developed feminine intelligence. So what are we even talking about? For me, the qualities of feminine intelligence, and you could maybe look at, some people may prefer considering kind of the yin energy rather than the yang energy. You can think about just the qualities, you don't have to give it a name, but the main qualities that I associate feminine intelligence with are to do with interconnectedness, empathy, regeneration, listening, being open, vulnerable. It's those types of qualities. And the world that I see around me is way out of balance. So that the masculine energy, the masculine intelligence has led us, has dominated for centuries. And so there is a need, in my opinion, to seek a rebalancing, to bring up the feminine intelligence so that it can work together in harmony with the masculine intelligence. So I could look at this myself as an individual, and some of my inner work that I do is to try and find that balance within myself as a human being, right? So it's not about where are the men and where are the women and what are we each doing. Although sometimes it does look like that, and sometimes it needs to look like that. So in peace building more quite broadly, and peace negotiations, that it is a field that is still completely dominated by men. And the reason why is, well, partly because of our culture, global culture, which I was just mentioning, but also when conflict breaks out, it tends to be men that fight, that take to fighting more than women. And it tends to be, therefore, men who have fought who get a place at the table. And so in my work, I know the value, and organizations have done research on this, the value of having more women involved at the kind of, in negotiations, certainly at the big negotiation table, what gets called track 1 diplomacy. And some of the stats on that, I can share one, it's a fairly old study now that UN Women did, that when you have, on average, you have around 2% of women involved in peace negotiations. And on average, this is statistics, take them with a pinch of salt, but on average, peace agreements last around 5 years. The minute you get the involvement of women at the table up to about 10%, peace agreements tend to last around 15 years. So why is that? One way that I understand that, and that the research also leans towards, is that women's experience of war is very different from the experience that men have in war. And when women come to the table, not only are they more likely to bring that feminine intelligence that we were just talking about, but their experience, they bring into the room, the wounded, the orphans, the displaced, the raped, the abused, sexually abused women and girls and boys. So they bring a lot more, or they bring in a much broader perspective of war. Men tend to, and forgive me because I am being very kind of crude in my distinctions here, because it's obviously dependent on specific situations, but men tend to be ready to cut up the pie of power, right? So that's why you get power sharing agreements, because it's about men trying to get the spoils of war, if you like, which is often political positions, etc. So the process of trying to get an agreement when
think we might have just temporarily lost Teohna. So Jackie, we've got a few more minutes before we go out into breakout rooms. I was wondering whether you both would like to share a few comments, and then when Teohna gets back, we can ask her to finish off.
Yeah, I'm just noticing some of the things that are coming up on the chat, and actually I'd like to just respond, because there are men in this conversation, some of whom who are speaking in the chat are contacts that I've invited, and I'm looking at something I've written on my notes about interconnected and together. And a book I've been reading recently, several books actually, on dignity by Donna Hicks, which talks about dignity is achieved in connection with others, where I's converge to become we. And for me, what I'm interested in is how do we shape peace together? Can we do that? And for me, that's about everybody. Whatever our gender, and because I truly believe that everything is connected to everything else, as Barry Commoner outlined in his 4 laws of ecology. It's also because we're connected to the planet and the climate, and all of us, whatever our gender, need to be thinking, deeply and seriously about the kind of action we're going to take in the world that we, all of us, are living in, because it's the human race also who's impacting the planet and the climate. And if we don't change how we work and live together using some of those feminine or whatever values, whatever words we want to say for that, I really believe if we don't take serious action individually and collectively as there's very little hope for sustaining our lives, our planet, our existence. Yes, and Mikhail's talking about the concept in different languages as well. And here we are we're doing this in English, but English is not the first language of everybody, in this event. And I think that's something also really important to think about, is that the differences, the diversity, how do we come together? And that's all I want to say about the I's converging to become we.
Thank you, Jackie. And Miranda, would you like to share something around feminine intelligence and before we move into discussions?
Yeah, I'll keep it short. But I think the important thing for me that Teohna was so beautifully expressing is that the feminine intelligence is something that we all as humans do have access to, and I think it's important, like vitally important, that we remember that we need all of us. So what Jackie was saying, we all need to be working together. We all need to be finding ways through our messiness, through our agreements, our differences of opinions, politics, etc., to find the ways to, find a way through climate change, find a way through all of the conflicts that are going on, and find a way through to a better and safer world for everyone. And that doesn't mean that it's going to be women doing all of that work. In fact, it shouldn't be. And I don't use the word should lightly. And the idea of feminine intelligence, I think the rebalancing that Teohna was speaking about is something that I feel very strongly about as well. That sense that the kind of very directional energy versus more kind of holding and hearing and listening and empathetic energy, and you could call it many different things. And I think in terms of societal framing, calling something feminine intelligence is useful, is a useful way of being able to refer to something. We could call it many other things, and that it's it's something that anyone of any gender has access to. So it's about sensing what that means and listening to each other in finding the way through all of that together.
Thank you, Miranda. I'm just going to finish this session with a comment that somebody's made. I think it's Beatrice, my focus and experiences with children, young boys and girls, are equally sensitive and willing to solve conflict and listen. It's the culture around them that allows boys and girls to start solving conflict differently. And this just reminds me that Creators of Peace have just started this new sort of guide called A New Story, and this is exactly what we focus on. It's this idea about sort of working together with yourself and then your community and finding that new story, and then being able to share that with yourself and with the people around you. So I'm hoping that Teohna will join us again. We're running a minute. Are you back?
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Do you want to finish off what you were saying, and then we'll move into the breakouts?
No, please don't worry. I think we've moved on, and time is probably. I'd much rather give the time to other people to have in the small breakout group.
Okay. So we're going to go out into breakout rooms. We've got about 7 to 8 minutes, and then we're going to come back together and just have a really quick Q&A. So we've had to cut the Q&A time slightly short, so we'll pick two or three of the questions and run through those. So just a reminder, everything that's been said by our speakers is very much at the beginning of the conversation. And the idea is that to take this home or take this to your friends over dinner and really start to discuss it further. So Julie's going to invite us into breakout groups. We will bring you back and we'll tell you when you've got about 2 minutes left. If you don't want to join a breakout group, just deny it. And then you will stay in the room with me. So thank you very much, Julie. We've got a chance to have 1 or 2 questions. So if anybody's got a question, if they could pop it into the question into the chat box now, that would be wonderful. And I do have one question that I'd like to just start with, and perhaps we could give Teohna the floor for this. Is Jane asked, very much enjoying the conversations. I wonder how we can look at the root causes of a conflict, and would that help with shaping peace?
Thank you, Jane. Yes, yes, and yes. Absolutely, looking at the root causes will help us shape any kind of, have any chance of anything like a sustainable peace. And I think there are many different ways that we can and that we do seek to address the root causes. I think whichever context we find ourselves in, whether it's the community context that Jackie works in predominantly, whether it or an individual family, right up to country level, I think there are many processes, and they're outlined in some of the books and literature and resources that we have on Business Plan for Peace, but also I think with Creators of Peace and Initiatives of Change as well. There's many different ways to do that. And if you don't get to the root causes, I am convinced that you don't ultimately have the chance of sustaining peace and really sustaining peace. So what I would bring it back to, from the kind of individual micro level right up to the macro level, but at that micro self level, it's about doing that inner work. It's about developing our mighty heart, because then we're able to find the courage, the vulnerability, the empathy, to sit in an authentic way with others, to have those courageous conversations that Jackie has mentioned. And then you can escalate that right up to the macro level. But somehow we have to break the cycle of conflict. There's often a cycle that we're trapped in at whichever level, again, within a family, within a team, within a community, right up to country or international level. We're locked in a cycle. So it's about exploring that, recognizing that cycle and seeing how to break it and getting to the root issues, which is very difficult, very complex to solve, but that's where the work, I think that's where we should put our energies into doing the work.
And just continuing from that, Teohna, I know somebody's just popped something in about COVID-19 giving us the opportunity to redirect military spending. So I'm just picking up on this because this is mentioned quite a bit in Business Plan for Peace. It's an excellent read, and at Creators of Peace we will be perhaps looking at reading it as a book, sort of a book club, so that we can go through it and have discussions together. But could you just say a quick word about that, Teohna? Because I think that's kind of, that statement's connected directly to the book, I think.
So it's specifically with the opportunity that the COVID pandemic
COVID-19 is bringing, yeah.
Yeah, I think so many of you who are listening, I'm sure, are part of different initiatives, but there are a fair few initiatives that I'm aware of that seek to build back better, build back differently, you know, using this opportunity of being in this crisis, many of us for the first time being in crisis in this side of the world, through the pandemic, or maybe also for many, the reference point is the climate emergency. But there is this opportunity for us, the whole country, if I'm talking about the UK, and it happened differently in different countries, but we stopped. We stopped, everything stopped, and we could listen and breathe. And that was such a precious moment that will probably never happen again in our lifetime. It could happen in a couple of months again, but hopefully not. And so I think that's presented an opportunity that many people I know, including Business Plan for Peace, have sought to take advantage of. So one thing that we're doing is contributing to a toolkit that's being put together for policymakers to ask them and enable them, give them the mechanism and the data and the resources to be able to consider prioritizing things that they never used to prioritize. Divestment being one, funding, actually budgeting for conflict prevention being another, many public health issues, doing things differently. And so I can say that Business Plan for Peace, along with many others, are getting this sort of information under the noses or the eyes of people that make decisions in our government. And I think that's happening beyond the UK. I know that's happening beyond the UK. Our work contributes to it beyond the UK. But I think there must be many initiatives that lots of people who are on this event will know about. A really important opportunity.
Thank you. That's a really valid. I've heard that quite a lot from people. Is this idea during COVID that everything stopped? You know, that there was a great pause. And I think there's lots to explore in that, and really take a look very carefully of what happened during that pause and what's still happening in that pause. So I think there's great opportunities to find in there. I'm very mindful that we're coming to the end of the close, and I want to give the speakers just a few minutes at the end to really kind of wrap up their thoughts. But I think we've got time for one more question. And I would like to invite Jackie, perhaps, to answer, Jackie and Miranda, to engage in this, and perhaps you might like to engage in what Teohna also just shared, is how can we increase engagement with unrepresented stakeholders, migrants, women, etc., whilst keeping in mind that such engagements may increase the burden of certain communities and groups who are already greatly disadvantaged. So this brings us back to our very first conversation, I think, when we first started the discussion about that edge, working on the periphery.
Yeah, I'd really like to say something about that, because I was noticing that thing in the chat. So thank you, Anne, for the question. Because as I said about particularly what I'm working on with Initiatives of Change UK, is this programme that we have for refugees as rebuilders. And that is, you know, for some, particularly in this part of the world, migrants, refugees, asylum seekers are unrepresented stakeholders. And in this programme, we're particularly working with settled refugees. So they're, you know, adults, people with experience in life, you know, professional skills, and who have a desire to do something either for their country of origin in terms of, you know, conflict resolution or sustainable livelihood or something in leadership, but may also be wanting to do something in their diaspora communities. And part of what we're trying to do is provide knowledge and skills to encourage those individuals to take action. And we're doing that by, you know, a course over 3 levels on 3 different topics, which is, as I said, dialogue for social cohesion, ethical leadership for good governance, and sustainable livelihood for resilience. So there's that combination of doing the kind of business planning, the type of thing that Teohna is talking about as well, where you really have that kind of in-depth strategic approach, but also doing the work on ourselves and thinking about how we hold the space for others. And I think sometimes we have to take conscious initiative to support those, you know, disenfranchised or you know, communities who are often left out, or in this part of the world, particularly in the UK, quite stigmatized by what we see in the media. So I'm very pleased that, you know, a colleague had the vision for that, and that we can, you know, support doing something of that nature.
Thank you. Miranda, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I think just to lead on from that, like to follow on from that, is the role that I see as part of what we do with Creators of Peace, but also something I'm very passionate about anyway, which is accompanying people and supporting people in their journeys. So if it's about you know, how to get these people who are marginalized, or people who are on the edges of society, or people who are being stigmatized by our governments, how to include those people, it's also how to support those people in taking that leadership role and supporting people to be in that space. So yeah, so something that I really love is that place of listening and sitting with and thinking, okay, how do I support this person on a longer journey, for them to take leadership and to sort of stand alongside, which is something where you kind of have to put your ego in a to one side as well, and to not be thinking, okay, how do I want this situation to go, but how am I going to support this person in taking leadership in this situation, and actually just remembering that, like, we're all humans, and to really support people when they have been marginalized, to stand alongside rather than to imagine that I have the answers, or that can change things. So to stand alongside people on those journeys for the long term as well, if necessary, I think is important.
Thank you, Miranda. So we're just coming to a close, and I think this has already been said by some of our speakers, is that one thing that's happened during COVID is that it's exposed the gaps that already existed. And that exposure is helping us now as Creators of Peace, or Business Plan for Peace, or Initiatives of Change UK, to really reflect on those gaps and see how they can, or how we can, as Jackie used, how we can start incorporating that into some sort of accompanying, which Miranda's just talking about. So I'd like to give each of our speakers just 30 seconds to just give their final thoughts and a wrap up. This 1.5 hours have gone past very, very quickly, and we've just briefly touched on just gems. But I'm hoping that we've been able to inspire and spark just a few flames in people's hearts over this last 1.5 hours. So, so Miranda, would you like to begin, and then?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. I just want to say thank you so much to all of you. It's been a really wonderful time having this conversation. I think for me, it's the thing that just popped into my head is it's about celebrating this day as well. So it's wonderful to have the opportunity to have delved into some of these conversations with you all on the International Day of Peace, and to be thinking more about what it is that we want to be doing going forward, and what all of our different roles are together. So I think that the thing that really is going to stick with me from this conversation is the idea of we, and how that like the massive collective we, and it's always good to come back to that idea. So thank you.
Thank you, Miranda. Teohna.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll offer one very concrete opportunity for people if they're interested. The Business Plan for Peace is about to start an online training course based on Sila Elworthy's current book called The Mighty Heart. It's a 10-week course starting in a few weeks' time, beginning of October, I think the 5th of October. And it's a chance to explore and develop and bring forth your mighty heart. And we really need all of us to be bringing our mighty heart to whatever we do in the world right now, because we're living in urgent times. I would also say that when, and this happens for all of us, it certainly happens for me because I'm human, in the moments where I feel it's impossible, whatever I'm trying to do, whoever I'm trying to connect with, I look to this necklace that I wear, and I don't know if anybody can see, but it's a flying pig. And in England, there's an expression of like, and pigs will fly. And we say that when we say it's completely impossible, it'll never happen. And I know that pigs can fly, so the impossible is in fact possible. And it's only possible by working together. So this idea of the we, of being interconnected, and I think the opportunity that our climate emergency and that our public health emergency with the pandemic, I think the opportunity there is to that many more of us realize that we are absolutely interconnected, and what happens to me impacts you, and what happens to you impacts me. So we have to work together to make the impossible possible. Thank you very much. Thanks so much for coming from so many different parts of the world, for your time and for your input. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Teohna. And I invite Jackie, who has collaborated with us today. So thank you very much for Jackie.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you all for showing up, for being present, for engaging, because that's part of the process of us shaping peace together. And just all the things that Teohna Miranda said, you know, I wholeheartedly support and engage those. And for me, it is about that walking alongside each other, you know, how we can, the eyes converge to become we. But also, you know, that change starts with me, peace starts with me, in the sense that, you know, how I show up, the way that I am, that mighty heart that I try and have and open and practice. For me, that's where shaping peace together begins. It begins with me, it begins with we.
Thank you very much, Jackie. I know we're running slightly over time, but in keeping with tradition, one of the things that we do in Creators of Peace and on IFC tradition is that we offer up just a moment of silence to really honor what's been said and acknowledge what's been said, and just let the time that we spent together over the last 1.5 hours just to rest with us. And it's just a moment of silence, and I'll bring you all back in a minute. So you can leave your eyes open, you can perhaps close your eyes, we invite you to do that. And we just take this time for one moment. Thank you. So a big thank you from Creators of Peace UK. And I just want to say a very big thank you to all our speakers, including our partner, IFC UK. So thank you very much, Jackie, for supporting us today. Thank you, Miranda, for taking the time out and coming to be part of the conversation. And thank you so much, Teohna, for sharing the wealth of knowledge that you bring with you. And I also want to send a big thank you to Julie, who's been doing all the tech work. So Julie, if you could just give us a wave so people who know who you are. So very big thank you to Julie. And lastly, I just want to thank everybody who joined us today. There's a lot of you left today. We had over 80 people join us online, which was fantastic. So some people have had to leave. So thank you very much for joining us from all over the world. And thank you very much for those who donated money for today, because all of our peace circles are free. And we're only able to do that because of grant funding, because of donations. So thank you very much for that. We'll put the donation link in the chat box. We're going to send you details of Teohna's organisation, IFC UK website address as well, which we'll put in the chat box, and Creators of Peace UK. So you're welcome to get in touch with us. And if you want to be part of the programme that Teohna talked about, we'll send that in an email. And the one that Jackie talked about, and also Creators of Peace, if you want to be part of a peace circle. We'll be holding another one later on this year. So we're going to unmute you, and we've got the opportunity to say goodbye to each other, and we'll be put on gallery view so you can see everybody. And it was a delight to have you with us. So thank you so much.